Wow. I'm sure for most of you this is also true. Oahu is one of our happy places. We circled those dates in the calendar and said, wow, we get to be with this incredible community in beautiful places, especially this year. I mean, my God, we've been blown away. And one thing I've learned in Italy, you always have to look up. You never know what's a look. It's like a Sistine Chapel everywhere. It's incredible. So again, really, really happy to be with you and to share some ideas around this idea of healing. I know we've heard a lot about burnout and various stress and all kinds of great insights on those subjects. And I'd like to talk about this idea, which is really an evolution of conscious capitalism. I would say this is super conscious capitalism. This is actively seeking out ways in which we can reduce suffering and bring more joy into the world through business. And this is not about starting more healing businesses like yoga studios and massage places. This is about business itself as a healing activity, both for the people who work in the company and for the people we serve. So how can we spread happiness through business? And most of this is based on my book called The Healing Organization, which is a collection of about 25 stories. I must have cried about 6 times writing that book. And that's always, for me, a test. When your body tells you something, you know that it's important. Right? So I believe this message is urgently needed. And if you think about the times we're living in right now, I'm reminded of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, where he said it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And I think that's really true. There's never been a better time to be born a human being than today. Your chances of living a long, healthy, meaningful, purposeful life where you can actually pursue your passions, develop your capacities, and do amazing things as an individual, those odds have never been greater. And at the same time, we have never faced the kind of existential threats that we collectively face on this planet. Climate change being one of them, but future pandemics and species extinction, and there are many others. We've never actually faced anything on that scale. So our challenges are greater than ever, but so is our capacity to do something about them. As Dickens said, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, and it was the age of foolishness. And I think we see that in the world today, right? We see the highs and the lows of what human beings are capable of. So those are some beautiful words that describe this present moment. So life is beautiful and filled with joy, and I think this country knows how to celebrate the joy of living more than most other places. But life is also tragic and filled with suffering. There's incredible suffering in the world today. We made lots of progress in the last 200 years. Per capita incomes have gone up 1,500%, and life expectancy has more than doubled, and literacy has gone from 14 to 88%, and many, many other indicators of human development. And at the same time, we know that there are lots of people suffering. Tens of thousands of children dying every day from preventable causes. 3 billion people living on still less than $5 a day without access to bare necessities, and we've heard all the other data as well. So we're living at one of the most peaceful times in human history and one of the most prosperous times in human history, but as we've heard others also talk about, psychological suffering has been going up dramatically. Anxiety, depression, drug addiction, suicides, all of these things are going up, and not just in poor countries, even more so in richer countries. And of course, our social and ecological suffering is also great. We're living through, as I said, the 5th mass extinction in the history of this planet. Species are disappearing left and right. There's tremendous amount of suffering out there that we're creating. 75 billion animals are killed every year after being raised in factory farms where they're tortured. There's lots and lots of suffering which is imposed by humans in this planet, and we don't have to live that way. And I believe that all suffering matters. There's a karmic accounting of all of that suffering somewhere, and we have to eradicate unnecessary human-caused suffering. So with so much suffering in the world, I believe the paramount need of the times is for healing. Because we all need to heal ourselves. We've talked about physical, mental, emotional, all the dimensions in which we all need healing. Our families and our communities. We certainly need to heal our countries. I live in the US. It's never been as fragmented and as divided, bitterly polarized as it is today. And the same is true in India. And the same is true in Brazil, and the same is true in the UK. And I don't know how things are going here, but I'm guessing it's probably true. So we need to heal our countries. We need to heal our companies. We certainly need to heal our planet. We need to put life at the center of everything that we do, and we have been steadily destroying the very system that gives us life. And we need to heal the past in order to heal the present and heal the future. Gandhi said that truth is more important than peace. Without truth, there can be no peace. That's why South Africa had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You have to heal the past by acknowledging the truth of what happened in the past. The United States hasn't done that very well when it comes to slavery or the native population, right? So there's lots of ugly history in the humanity's rear mirror, which we haven't fully acknowledged and healed from. Hence, we carry the bitter wounds of that, and hence conflict continues in the world the way that it has. I believe that with so much suffering in the world, what it means is that every one of us, in a way, needs to be a healer. It doesn't matter if you're a professor like I am, or a doctor, or a lawyer, or a teacher, or whatever be your occupation. You can think of your role in this life is healing, which is, again, as I say, reduce suffering and bring more joy and promote healthy growth. There's a lot of compulsive, unhealthy growth in this world, especially in the world of business. It's all about ratcheting up those numbers and targets, and that inevitably causes suffering when it's sort of that pursuit of growth for its own sake to feed the ego, right, of the leaders. So as the Dalai Lama said, our prime purpose in this life is to help others, and if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. And the fact is that we are hurting each other. And we're not doing it deliberately in most cases. Unless you're a sociopath, you're not deliberately hurting other people. But the fact is that if you don't consciously choose to be part of the healing, you are probably inadvertently part of the hurting. And so we have to wake up and see the impact and the consequences of our actions, our words, and what kind of suffering that they're bringing into the world. Because as James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So we have to hold up a mirror to humanity and say, okay, what are we doing? What kind of suffering are we causing? And of course, there's many domains within which we can talk about that, but I'm going to focus on business, because that's our focus in conscious capitalism. So what about suffering when it comes to business? Well, this statistic says a lot. Heart attacks are 20% higher on Mondays. In the UK and in the US, there are multiple studies that have shown that. And it's 4 a.m. Monday morning, the peak of cardiac events, they call it. Think about that. Somehow people laugh when they see this number. But think about it, it's tragic. Our work is literally killing us. In fact, Jeffrey Pfeffer estimated that 120,000 Americans die every year from stress connected to work. It's not the work itself. Our work is safer than it used to be, but it's the way we lead, manage, and organize, the way we deal with each other, that's causing all of that stress. The most shocking number, I think, is that in China now, they had to invent a new word called guaolaozi, which means death from overwork. And the estimate is that 600,000 people in China die every year from too much work. And Japanese, they have a similar word as well. Think about the human cost of doing business. Think about how much suffering exists. It doesn't show up on an income statement or a balance sheet. It's the largest cost that exists for a business. Unnecessary suffering. Shorter lives, people losing their fathers or mothers to the workplace, right? Sacrificing so much. We have this one life to live. And work is impactful and meaningful in a human life, and yet for most of us it is a source of suffering, it's drudgery. And the irony is that even our healing professions have become places of suffering. These are people doing noble work, they're living their purpose, and yet doctors, nurses, and veterinarians have higher rates of depression and drug addiction and suicide. It's double the rate of the overall population. So the way we lead and manage our organizations, including our hospitals, isn't working. It doesn't have to be that way. Some people say, well, that's just the way it is, right? Work, if you're going to get the benefits of business and work, then you have to pay the price. No, it doesn't have to be there. It doesn't say you have to kill people to make money. In fact, the opposite is true. The more we honor and cherish and love and care for the people, the more the business will flourish. So if you do it right, and I'm going to talk about what that means, we can run our businesses so that they all alleviate suffering and they elevate joy. And as I said earlier, it's not about starting healing businesses. It's about thinking of business as a healing act. Business is the way we take care of each other. In a free society, governments don't meet our needs. Businesses are given the opportunity to sense and then meet our needs. And if we do that in a loving, caring way, that I'm here genuinely to serve you and meet your need in this particular dimension, I'm going to heal you in that dimension. But if I say, I'm going to use you to make money because you have a need I can exploit, then the same act becomes a source of suffering. Right? So we are all here on this planet to evolve ourselves and to take care of each other. And business is a way we can do that at scale. And it becomes fundamentally a healing enterprise. And this book is about 25 stories, as I mentioned. I thought I'd share a few of those stories for you because this is really what brings the message. The first one we call the parable of the pothole. You know, pothole is something that shows up in your highway. It's unexpected. You're driving along at 60 miles an hour and suddenly you hit that thing and your tire blows out and your rim gets damaged and you have to pull over, and it's a little crisis, right? For most of us. But for some people, it's a life-changing event. When something happens in their life, I was shocked to learn that 50% of Americans have less than $400 in the bank. And if they need $2,000 within 30 days, they have no way to get it. They can go to their family, their friends, their place of work. They cannot raise $2,000 within 30 days. In the richest country in the history of the world at the time of economic boom, the data is from 2019. People are living that close to the edge of disaster and ruin. They could lose everything there. You know, their roof develops a leak, their heating system breaks down, their car breaks down, their kid gets sick and they don't have health insurance. You could lose everything. So people are living with that level of financial insecurity. So this was a company that I profiled called Apple Tree Answers. You know, and the CEO had created this company by merging a whole bunch of smaller call centers. It became the second largest in the US. And then he started looking at the data and looked at employee turnover and employee engagement. And overall, the numbers were mediocre. Turnover was 30%, and engagement was also about 35–40%. But then he looked at the difference between the managerial employees, the 15% or so that were college-educated, full-time professionals, and then the 85% who actually answered the phones. They were hourly paid, right? They actually did the work that generated the revenue. And he found a completely different world. For the hourly people, annual turnover was 118%. They only lasted on average 9 months. And the engagement was about 13%. But for the managers, the annual turnover was about 18%, and the engagement was something like 65%. So that was not bad. But for the other group, the hourly group, it was very, very different. He said, my God, that's not acceptable. What can I do to make these people happier so they don't all keep leaving and we keep having to replace them? And he started asking them, he said, well, the chairs are terrible. We get a backache every day. So, of course, he replaced the chairs. And then he asked them, what can we do to make your life better? So they gave suggestions and they implemented them. But ultimately, they ran into the reality that these people are struggling just to make ends meet. They have to live far away because they can't afford the rents. They drive these cars that are prone to breakdown, right? And they're one disaster away from ruin. And so the analogy we use is, imagine if the CFO of the company is driving into work one morning in her Mercedes-Benz, and she hits a pothole and blows out the tire, damages the rim. She calls the AAA in the US, what we have, right? And they come and they tow the car away and take it to the Mercedes dealer. She gets a ride to the office. She arrives an hour late. And everybody says, oh my God, are you okay? Can I get you some coffee? That must have been so scary. But it's a non-event. 3 hours later, the car is repaired and delivered back to the office. It's washed and cleaned, and insurance covered the cost. No big deal. But imagine, he said, one of our hourly employees is driving that same road in her $800 16-year-old car, and she blows out her tire and damages the rim. She doesn't have AAA. She can't afford these kinds of expenses, right? She has to call around and get a tow company to tow the car to some kind of gas station to fix it somehow. And then she gets a ride. She calls her friends to be dropped off at the office. She can't afford $35 for a taxi. She arrives 3 hours late. And she's told, oh, the supervisor's really mad. He's waiting for you. You better go in there. She goes in and she gets reprimanded harshly. This is very unprofessional. You have to show up on time. I don't want any excuses. And at the end of it, he says, now go and answer the phones and be nice to our customers. Now, this poor woman has $160 in the bank. She has no idea how she's going to get that car back and how she's going to take her kids to school tomorrow and how she's going to get to work. And we kick her when she's down. There's no empathy. So the CEO said, I'm going to start a program so that people don't have to suffer when things like this happen, unexpected things. Let's create a buffer. So they called it the Dream On program. And they put a certain amount of money in there, and they put a thing on their web saying, if you have any emergencies that you're dealing with, please ask us for help. We don't want you to struggle alone facing these kinds of things. And they waited for 8 days and nothing happened. And he said, I know people need help. Why aren't they replying? And finally, one woman wrote in. And she started her note by saying, I am so sorry, but I need help. She said, my ex-husband stopped paying alimony. 2 weeks ago and 1 week ago, my kids and I got evicted from our apartment, and we've been living in my car now for a week. And I'm sorry, I can't do this to my children anymore. I need help. And the CEO read this and he said, all I felt was a deep sense of shame. He said, what kind of a leader am I? What kind of a company am I running? What kind of a culture do we have? We're a full-time employee who's a mother. It took her a week, even though we're asking people to ask for help. It took her a week to come forward. So, of course, they got her into a hotel the same night. Then they found her an apartment within a week. They helped her furnish it, pay the first month and the last month and the security deposit, which is a huge hurdle for half the population. And then they said to her, we can keep this confidential. We don't have to tell other people if you want. She said, no, nobody has ever done anything this nice to me, for me in my entire life. I'm going to tell everybody I know. And she did. And soon the floodgates opened, and so many people came forward with their own stories and their own need for help. And they asked for help, and the company helped each and every one of them. And fast forward 2 years, the annual employee turnover for the call center workers went from 118 down to 16%. Now, this in an industry where the average is 158%. Now, imagine if your turnover is 1/10 the industry average. Do you think you have a competitive advantage? Do you think your business is going to do well? It does. Right? So all these things, all the stories I'm going to tell you, you do it because you care. But there are positive business consequences, but that's not why you do it. And what I've recognized, people are incredible. People are stoic and people are heroic, and they walk around with these extraordinary burdens that if you could see a thought bubble over the head of every one of your frontline employees, it would break your heart every day. What people deal with just to get by, and yet they're there and they're smiling and they're doing their work. Right? We have to honor that and treat them with love and dignity and respect. Another example is changing industry norms. Every industry has some standard operating procedures. In consulting, the norm has been that you have to be away at the client side Monday to Friday. Most consulting companies, you have to do that, right? So you leave Sunday night or Monday morning, you come back Friday night. So these 3 consultants from Accenture, they loved their job and they were great at it, and then they got married, and now they weren't so happy about being away all the time, and then they wanted to start a family, and it's like, oh my God, what is that going to be like if I'm gone and we have a baby at home and our children start growing up and we never get to be with them? That is a huge cost. That is a very high price to pay, to miss the childhood of your own children just because you want to be a consultant. And they said, we don't want to pay that price. So they left Accenture and they started their own consulting company in Atlanta. They called it JBN. And they made a rule that the children of our employees are stakeholders in our company. Their well-being will be measured and tracked. In fact, the family fills out a survey every year about the company. So we don't want to miss the childhood of our own children. We don't want any of our employees. So all of their clients are local. They sold their people. You never have to travel for work. If we have a lot of business in Chicago, they opened a new office there. They opened one in Charlotte and one in Dallas, right? And this little company now has 3 of the top 20 consultants in the US work for JBN. Why? Because they took that trade-off, that horrible choice that people were being given, right? And they took it away. Why? Why do we have to stick to that norm that causes unnecessary suffering? This story comes from India, serving the innocent. Jaipur Rugs is a company that sells hand-woven carpets. It's an ancient art form that artisans have been producing in India. Now, in India, everything is organized by caste. So this is the weaver caste, and they're considered untouchables in the Indian system. One of the worst things about India is the caste system, and within that, the lower levels of people who are born into that particular caste, and they do the menial work, and other people won't even look at them. Even if the shadow falls on some people, they say, oh my God, I have to have a bath because, this happened. Somebody's shadow fell on me. And if you're born a girl into an untouchable family in India, that is the worst possible lot that you can imagine in life. They are fed last, they are barely educated, if at all. They are married off at a young age, then they have to go and cook and clean for their in-laws, and then they have to have children, and they also have to bake carpets and earn money for that family, and they get abused by their mother-in-law and by their husband, who's often an alcoholic, and by the contractors who give them the yarn and ask them to make a carpet, and then don't pay them or pay them half of what they promised because they found one little mistake, or they abuse them physically, sexually, and many other ways. Their lives are hellish. And N.K. Chaudhary said, these are the innocent people in the world. They have never harmed anybody, and all they have done is serve other people. I want to serve them. I want to make their lives better. So Jaipur Rugs has 40,000 women now who work in their system. And they're treated with respect and dignity, and they're educated, taught reading, writing, and basic accounting skills. Many of them are now entrepreneurs within the system. And this is a woman, Shanti, on the right. I interviewed her, and her life was as I had described. She almost died of starvation multiple times. Her family almost died. She had all that abuse heaped upon her. And now her life is completely different because she's part of this. And I asked her, Mr. Chaudhary was sitting there, I said, how do you feel about Mr. Chaudhary? And she just started crying. She said, I don't have words. She said, to me, he's more than my mother and father. To me, he is God because he gave me life. Before this, I didn't have a life. And now she has 4 children. 2 have graduated from college. There are 3 girls and 1 boy. The 2 girls have graduated. 1 is in college and the boy is in 10th grade. 4 children from this illiterate, untouchable woman are now going to graduate from college. And their lives will be transformed for generations to come in this family. Why? Because this business sought to create a healing environment in which they could actually flourish and be who they are. Another example comes from the US. You know, every society, I just mentioned India with the caste system, every society has certain things which are the worst aspects of that society. The social sadness, we call them, right? In the US, we have several, but one of them is the criminal justice system. The US puts more people in prison than any other country in this entire world, including North Korea and Russia, any country that you can name, in Cuba. A higher percentage and higher in absolute numbers, and most of them for minor, non-violent things. 74 million Americans have a criminal record today. It's the same number that have a college degree. And when you apply for a job, there's a little box you have to check that have you ever been convicted, etc. And if you check that box, most doors are closed in your face. They say, we don't hire ex-criminals here. And so these people never get even a first chance because they're born into rough circumstances and they're surrounded by drugs and violence and they get caught up in that system as teenagers and they can never escape. And so there's a Zen master named Bernie Glassman who said, I want to reduce this suffering. He lives in Yonkers, one of the richest counties in the US, but one of the highest levels of homelessness. And he found a lot of the people are people with a ex-convict, with a record. And he said, I want to create a company where we can give people a first chance. And millions of people don't even get a first chance. So he said, I actually want to create a bakery where we're going to give people a job and we're going to bake. We don't hire people to bake brownies. We're going to bake brownies so we can hire people. So this company makes some great brownies. You can find them in Ben & Jerry's ice cream and Whole Foods. Right? But they basically, and they pioneered what they call open hiring. If you need a job, you put your name on a list. And they hire the next name on that list. No background checks and no interviews. They give 9 months of training and they pay them, and then they put them into a job. And now these people are able to live with dignity and actually make their way in the world. This is Dion Drew, who spoke at our conference. And he was in tears. He said, if it weren't for this company, I would either be in jail or I would either be dead or back in prison. So every time I came out, I looked for a job. Nobody gave me a job. I ended up back on the corner I had to stay alive. He said, now I have a daughter. I have an apartment. He makes $65,000 a year as a training supervisor. He has a life now. And these are all for-profit businesses, okay? I'm not talking about nonprofits here. You know, caring for people is something a lot of people are talking about now. But a few years ago, Harvard Business Review had this cover that happiness is profitable. And a lot of CEOs saw that and said, okay, what do we need now? Let's get everybody together. How do we create more happiness around here, right? Do we need free beer on Friday? Do we need foosball tables? Like, what do we need? Because it's going to make us more profit. Well, you know, you have to do the right things for the right reason. You have to care for people because you care for the people, not because it's going to make you more money. You know, it's like asking somebody to marry you and she says, why do you want to marry me? And you say, well, I read that married men live 5 years longer. And they make 30% more income in their lifetime, so I have a great business case for marriage. You know, we have to marry for love, and we have to do these things for people out of love. Every single act in our life, as a leader, as a parent, just as a human, should come from a place of love, not fear, not greed, not anger. Right? So we have to do the right things for the right reasons. And when I started writing this book, I had ordered Chinese food, and in the US, you get this fortune cookie along with your meal, right? And this is literally, I'm not making this up, this was the fortune cookie I got. There are many ways you can be hurtful. There's only one way to heal, and that is through love. So we have to bring love into the world. And when we do this, business can become a place of healing for those who work there. They can leave at the end of every day physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and socially stronger than when they came in. It can be a place of healing, a source of healing for our customers and our communities. And it can be a force for healing in society, which we really, really need at this time. And so whether you have a healing organization or a hurting organization, as with everything else, depends on the leader. If you have a leader who hasn't healed themselves, who's carrying around wounds and traumas, who's acting from those wounds in a reactive way, they're going to cause suffering. They're going to inflict suffering on others because they haven't healed themselves. So the more you heal yourself, the more you will heal the organization. And that's really the next journey. And so what we need to do is to liberate two things that are locked away in the corporate closet. There's unexpressed love. Human beings have a need to care, and most organizations don't actually create the environment in which we can express our love and care towards each other, towards our customers. And there's silent suffering. People are walking around with all of these burdens, and nobody's asking them and nobody wants to know. So keep that at home. No. Can we allow people to be human and vulnerable and ask for help when they need it? And can we allow other people, give them the gift of being able to care for others? When somebody asks for help, it's not just a gift to the recipient, it's a gift to the giver as well. You're giving me the opportunity to be of service. So if we can liberate these two things from the corporate closet, then we'll change our work environments from places that feel today like a prison for many people. Right? You can't wait to get out. It's within these hours you have to be there. You have no freedom. You have no dignity. And you can transform them into places that feel like playgrounds. There's joy, and there's play, and there's camaraderie, and there's connection, and there's incredible innovation, and all of the things that can happen in the right environment. So that's really the opportunity that we have. And on that journey of healing yourself as a leader, I just want to mention my book coming out in about 2 weeks. I spoke about this last year at this conference. So the book is called Awaken, The Path to Purpose, Inner Peace, and Healing. So it's coming out in 2 weeks. So thank you very much for your time and attention.